To create a Windows Forms application in Visual Studio 2012, go up to File, New Project, and then typically we've been choosing Console Application, but to create a Windows Forms application, you want to pick Windows Forms Application and give it a name just like before. I'll call this one Forms Demonstration 2 because I think I have a 1 already. We'll make sure that we are not checking Create Directory for Solution and not adding to source control. Click OK, and our project will be created with a default form created for us. And first thing I want to show you is our program.cs file. If you look over here, there's still a main method. That's going to be the first thing that runs in our program. All this main method is doing is displaying that default form, and you do not want to ever change this file name, and you do not want to change any code inside of your program.cs file. So I'm going to go back to my form. The first thing you are going to want to do for all of the assignments in this class dealing with Windows Forms is change the name of that default form. And so we can right click and rename our form, but do not change that .cs extension. Notice that it automatically selected everything. Do not overwrite everything because you'll lose your .cs extension and your project won't compile. So we just want to change this form 1. We'll call this demo form. And the names of our forms should be in Pascal case with capital letters starting each word, like I've shown here, whereas all of our controls on our form we want to be camel case, just like variables. So hit enter. It's going to prompt me if I want to change all of the references. I certainly do want to say yes to this dialog box. And then I'll show you what happened in program.cs. In program.cs now we're running demo form. If I had said no to that dialog box, this still would have said form 1, and if we had tried to compile, we would have had a syntax error saying I can't find form 1. Form 1 doesn't exist. But demo form does exist. It's over here. And we will never need to go back into program.cs in this demonstration. So here is our form, and I'll run the program for you so you can see what's going on. And so here is our compiled application. We can minimize, we can maximize, we can restore, we can even resize our window and close it. But there's nothing in it, no interaction, because we haven't created any methods or any controls that handle anything. So first thing I want to point out, down below the Solution Explorer is this Properties window. This Properties window you'll be using frequently for Windows Forms applications. And I want to go over these buttons on the top. First of all, these first 2 buttons show how the information or how each of the properties are displayed, either categorized in groups, so all of the properties dealing with accessibility are grouped together, all the properties dealing with appearance are grouped together, and the second one, the default view, is alphabetical, and this is actually the view that I prefer, but you can choose however you want to display it. So in alphabetical view, we can go down here and select this text property. This text property is basically going to be what goes in the title bar up here. So I don't want this form to be called form 1. I want to call this class demo form. And notice when I hit enter, my title is going to change. Now I have a cleaner title up here. Next button over is properties. That's what's selected, so we're seeing all of the properties dealing with this selected item, and what we have selected right now is the entire form. Next, the lightning bolt shows events. So events, all of these words in here have verbs in them, and these are events that we can trigger and capture and run events and run modules, or excuse me, run methods every time that these events happen. So say every time the form is resized, we want to run a method. Every time that the user clicks in our form, a method happens. So these are all events. We're not going to put any events on the form itself. We will put events with some buttons that we're going to create. So next let's start adding some content, some controls into our form. Before I do that, I think this form is going to be a little too small, and so I am going to go to my size properties right here, and these size are listed in pixels, and so I want my form to be a tall form, so let's do 300 wide by 400 tall. And so now I have this tall form. I can also resize using the handles, and notice how these numbers down here are changing while I do that. And I'll do a 400 by 300 form, and that looks good. So let's add some controls. Over here is the toolbox, which you haven't used before in console applications, but if you don't see it, it might be because it's hidden, and so you might see toolbox over here on the left. If you click once, you can see our toolbox. The problem is, since it's not pinned down right now, if we click outside of that toolbox, it auto hides each time. And so to prevent that, we can click this push pin right here, which will lock that taskbar into place, and now we can click anywhere in that taskbar stays up. So up here under all Windows Forms, these are every single control that you could put into a Windows form. Down below that is common controls. It's basically a subset of that top list. I think everything we need will be in this list, so I'll just work in the common controls. So the first thing I want to put on my form is a button, and so this is easy. It's drag and drop interface, and so here's my first button. Below that, I want to put two text boxes. Text boxes are controls where users can enter information and enter data. Below that, I want to display a label. A label is going to be text that is not editable, and not selectable and not changeable. And below that, finally, I want a button. Okay. So these controls are in place, but they don't have very exciting names yet, or text on them. So next thing I want to do is change some of the properties for these controls that I just dragged on here. So let's select that first button. Up here on the top of my properties is the name of my button. Right now it's called button 1. That's not a good name for this. I want to call this button display message button. And notice that I typed that in camel case, as I should. Notice also that that did not change the text inside of my button. That is under the text property down here. So I don't want this to say button 1, I want this button to say display a message. I hit enter, it does say that, but it doesn't fit, so I can use these handles, drag this out, and make that button large enough to show all of my text. Next, I want to change the names for these two text boxes. The first one I'll call operand 1 text box. Again, I'm going camel case. And then below this, operand 2 text box. And what I'm going to be creating here is a simple addition calculator where the user types in a number into operand 1 text box and operand 2 text box. Every time they click button, this label gets replaced with the sum of those two values. So next, my label, I want to give this a name of answer label, and let's set its text property to 0. Good. And then this final button I am going to call perform addition button, and for my text, perform addition. And this doesn't fit also. I'm going to make this button taller to make everything fit. That looks nice. And so let's run our program now. So I've given names to these controls, but they are not doing anything yet. I can type in hello world in here. That doesn't do anything. Perform addition, display a message. Our form still doesn't have much functionality. That's because we haven't assigned any events to these controls. So let's do just that. First, for display a message, we changed the text property and the name property here in the properties tab, but now I want to go to this events tab tab, and here in the click event, if I double click where my mouse is right now, this is going to open up the code behind window and automatically generate a method for me. So let's double click that, and here is the new method that's been created for me, what I have selected here. Display message button underscore click. So this is the name of my control, and this is the name of the event. It's the click event. Also, I forgot to mention up here, this method that's created for you right here is automatically generated. You don't need to type that in, and also do not change that. And when you're doing your assignments for CIS 220, up here on the top is where you should enter in your block comments. And then the name of the form, and a brief description of the class or the form in this instance. So now back down to the method that's been created for us. So every time that button is clicked, I want to display a message to the user. So display a message, and so we are going to display a message box. Message box.show, and then inside of here the message box can take many arguments. We're just going to give it one argument, and that's a sentence in here, just the text that's going to appear in that message box. And I'm just going to say thank you for clicking the button. There we go. End my line of code with a semicolon, just like in console applications. So just one line of code and one comment in this method. And so now let's run our program again and see if this is working. So here's my display a message button. Thank you for clicking the button. It works. Good. All right, let's go back to our design view. Notice there's two tabs up here. The design view is going to be a graphical view of my form, and then demoform.cs without the word design in it is my code behind. So next, for this perform addition button, I can also create a method for the click event by double clicking on a button that already exists in my form, which I'll do. One note of warning: do not double click on a button in your form until you have first given that button a name. Otherwise, it's going to be the default button 2 or something. You'll double click on it. You'll create a method for the button 2 click property, and then the problem is if you ever change the name of this button, then when you click on it, there's going to be a disconnect between the name of the button and the method that's triggering when you click that button. So make sure there's a name in here first. So I'm going to double click on this, and just like before, it's going to create a new method for me in my code behind window. So this one's going to have a few more lines of code than our previous one. I want to first declare a variable to store my answer. Remember, we're adding the values of operand 1 and operand 2 text box. So that's just going to be int answer. And next thing I want to do is add the values from the text boxes. Okay. So we're going to set answer equal to something. We're going to set it equal to the sum of those two text boxes. And we don't want to set it equal to the sum of those two text boxes. We want to set it equal to the sum of the text properties of those text box controls. One thing to note, those text boxes store values as strings. So when a user types, say, the number 17 into the text box, that text box is not storing the value as 17 like we want it to. It's actually storing it as 17 as a string. And so in order to get this string to be stored as an integer, we need to do a conversion. And so we're going to do convert dot to, we'll do an integer 32 here. And what do we want to convert? Well, we want to convert operand 1 text box, but we don't want to convert the text box. The text box is a control, If a user types in 17 into the text box, that's what we want to access. And so what we want to access is the text property of the operand 1 text box. So that's how we do that. And then I'm going to add this basically to operand 2 text box. I can copy and paste this that I've written. I'll go down to another line and finish off my line of code, changing this to operand 2 text box. I can have one line of code span multiple lines because that semicolon wasn't typed up here on this first line. So this line of code right here works the same as had I done it like this. Okay, so we've added the 2 values, but the problem is we haven't put those values into that answer label. That's what we're going to do on this final line of code here. And so we want to change this answer label's text property and set that equal to answer. But the problem is our labels can only store and display strings, but answer is right now an integer. So what we need to do to this answer variable is convert it to a string. Every integer variable has this .toString method automatically generated with it, part of the C# programming language and .NET framework. So this .toString method is going to change. It's going to change this to this. This is what we can put into our text box, or excuse me, into our label. We cannot put this into our label because this is an integer, this is a string. That's what's happening there. One thing that a lot of students when they're first doing Windows Forms programming are going to goof up on is think that they can just do this. Oh yeah, I'm adding the value of operand 1 text box to operand 2 text box. It doesn't work that way because operand 1 text box is not accessing that text property. So make sure you are accessing your text property of your text box and of your labels when you're doing this. So we have this all written. Let's run our program and see if our calculator is working. I'll drag this in. Display a message still works. And let's put in some values here. 17 plus 18. We should see 35 appear here when we perform addition. Good. 17 and 19, we should now see 36. Good. Our calculator is working nicely. And what you'll be doing for programming assignment 8 is creating a similar form that will have addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division buttons on it to do all 4 of those mathematical operators. Last thing I want to do before I sign off is add a menu up here. Adding a menu to a form is really easy. We'll go back into our design view, and I don't think that a menu is under common controls. So we're going to have to go into all Windows Forms, and you'll see a menu strip control, which I'll drag up here to the top of my form. And adding values to your menu is really simple. It's just typing. So I want a file menu with exit below it and a help menu with about below it. There's usually a help menu with an about button below it, and that's going to display copyright information or maybe information about the author. So here's our menu. I'll run that so you can see what that looks like. Over here, file, exit, about. Problem is when we click on these, nothing happens. That's because we haven't set any events to trigger when these buttons are clicked. Let's do that. So first thing I want to do is create an event for my when this exit button is clicked, or exit menu item. So if I double click that, a method is generated for me, and I want to exit the application so my user doesn't have to click on that red X on the top. And this is a simple line of code, application.exit. You'll need to use this for all your Windows Forms applications. Real simple line of code, self-explanatory. What it does, it kills the form. And next I want a method for my about menu strip item. Double click that, and I'm just going to display author information, and I'm going to do that in the message box. And this was created there we go. So let's see if our menu strip items are working. Help about, yep, that works well, and file exit. That exits our program. So that's it.